ready. Okay, I see lights on. We have a quorum. So, Robin, would you call roll?
Chair Bauer,
Here.
Vice Chair Corey, Board Member Bernstein,
Here.
Board Member Kohler, Board Member Mekinen, Board Member Shepherd, Board Member Wimmer. Here. 4 present, and we do have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. It's nice to see faces in the audience this morning. Welcome to all of you. We'll do oral communications. Anyone that wants to speak on any topic not on our agenda has 3 minutes. I don't have any cards, so we'll move right on to the next item. Agenda changes, additions, or deletions? I don't think we have any. All right. Okay. Official city reports?
We do not have any today.
Right. There's one correction on the meeting schedule. I had thought I would be out of town September 26th. I will not. I'll be here, so that's another opportunity for us to have a meeting. Okay, study session. It's 3 minutes per speaker, and I don't think we'll have a problem letting everyone who wants to speak. So let's move on to the action items, historic resources, board discussion, comments on historic resource evaluation of the former cannery property located at 340 Portage Avenue, commonly known to us Palo Altans as Fry's. Which is within the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, which you will see in the printed materials abbreviated as NVCAP. Okay, so I see that our consultant is here, and please begin your presentation.
I'm going to introduce Amy French, Chief Planning Official. I'm introducing Elena Lee, who is the manager of the project and is the long-range planning manager as well. And then, of course, we do have Christina Dykes from Page and Trimble.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, board members. So the purpose of today's meeting is to review and discuss a historic resources evaluation prepared as part of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. The plan is in its initial stages, and discussion on plan options have just begun. However, we anticipate 3 alternatives to be developed, but those have not been proposed or developed quite yet. There will be multiple future meetings at the next following stages to discuss those in detail, and the outcome of those meetings or the materials prepared for those meetings will depend definitely on the discussion and the feedback from you today. There will also be a second community meeting to actually also carefully review all of these options. So we anticipate that this project will require an environmental impact report or supplemental EIR because that it's been discovered through this process that the 340 Portage is eligible for the California registry. And that will require its own lengthy process and analysis. So I'll provide a brief overview of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan process, and as Amy said, Christina is here to present an overview of the HRE. So the NVCAP is a direct outcome of the comp plan update that was adopted in 2017. And there's actually an overview of the site. So it's basically a 60-acre site around what's known as the Fry's property, or 340 Portage. So comp plan has policy 1.7, which says that you should use coordinated area plans to help guide development, especially in areas where there is potential change. And the 340 Portage is one of the more open sites available likely for development. So specifically, comp plan program L4.10.1 states that a coordinated area plan shall be developed for the North Ventura area and surrounding California Avenue area. So in terms of a brief overview of the process, so City Council adopted goals and objectives and initiated the project with a schedule and boundaries. It also authorized the formation of a working group, and there are several members of the working group here today because there's been a lot of interest expressed in this particular issue. So there have been 4 working group meetings held between October 2018 and April 2019. On February 5th, the first community workshop was held, where we went over the site context and also identified issues developed through the working group meetings as well as raised by the community members. March 11th was a joint meeting between the working group and City Council, held as a town hall on Ventura topics in general, but specifically also discussing the coordinated area plan process. And on August 19th, we are proposing to go back to City Council as a follow-up from the March 11th town hall. And we are tentatively scheduled also to go back to the working group probably around August 21st. We also do have a website that is dedicated to this project, Palo Alto nvcap.org, and that provides an overview of the project as a whole, including all staff reports, and will also include a link to this particular hearing. So the procedures for the NVCAP process are outlined in Chapter 19.10. Oh. There. Okay. Sorry about that. And that it states that the intent is to create enhanced opportunities for building a sense of community through public involvement with meaningful opportunities to help shape the physical components of their neighborhoods and community. And so a primary statement that is very important for this project is that it is intended to create enhanced opportunities for public involvement. So the general process is that City Council initiates the CAP process and establishes goals and objectives. A working group is appointed to advise the process, and then it includes regular public meetings, including a community meeting. The Planning and Transportation Commission will have an opportunity to hear about the plan and also make their recommendations to City Council, as well as any environmental documents. And then finally, it will return to City Council. And throughout the process, we'll also be providing updates to the various boards and commissions that have a role in this process, and especially since there is a historic resource involved, and it'll be coming back to the HRB eventually. So Page and Turnbull was hired to provide historic analysis, including evaluation of the entire site. So they did a windshield survey evaluating all the potential sites. And it was, the determination was that 340 Portage, which is the subject of this HRE, was the only identified potential historic resource. So the HRE identified the property, including the Fry's building itself, and the associate office building is eligible for listing in the California Register of Historic Places, and it also qualifies as a historic resource per the California Environmental Quality Act. And we did receive multiple comments from the public regarding this project, ranging in a diversity of opinions about what should be done with the site. So those were presented. Those will also be made available to our working group members and on our project website as well. And in particular, our staff also wanted to respond to some of the comments that were raised. So again, as I stated, the purpose of this meeting is to discuss the HRE and to get feedback from the board about this, and also to emphasize the fact that options have not been developed or finalized yet. So today's meeting will go into feeding that into that process to develop the options, which obviously what we'll do with the 340 Portage will be an important component of that. And I think one of the things that was raised in particular was the rail spur that's located behind 340 Portage. So that was abandoned a while ago, and the rail spur was actually removed in 1964 when it was abandoned. And I also wanted to mention that we have the honor today of Gloria Hom in the audience today. She's actually the granddaughter of Thomas Foon Chu. So she's agreed to speak to us about the project, but also is here today in the audience. So I just wanted to mention that. And with that, I will turn this to Christina.
Can I interrupt for just a moment? You mentioned that the NVCAP goals would be formed inform the development of this site. Could you very briefly just tell the board and the audience what those goals are?
Sure. Let me locate that on our website. Sure, but yeah, there were specific goals and objectives that the city council adopted earlier this year, and those are available on but basically the goals are around housing, creation of additional housing opportunities and having a connected land use pattern, making basically a mixed-use neighborhood, because it's proximate to the Caltrain station, having good transit, pedestrian, and bicycle connections, having a connected street grid, having adequate community facilities and infrastructure, balance of community interests, having strong urban design and design guidelines and a neighborhood fabric, and sustainability and the environment.
Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. I think a little bit of my presentation on the left side might get cut off, but hopefully nothing of vital importance. I'm here to present the work that Page and Turnbull did. We were contracted to the city to do this work. As Elena prefaced, Page and Turnbull looked at the entire plan area to understand whether there are historic resources, and then as a result of that, we drilled into the largest property on the site, 340 Portage, and wrote a separate historic resource evaluation for that property. So just to explain a little bit about the survey that we did, we called this a windshield survey. We went out, we had property data with construction dates, so we looked at every building that was at least 50 years old, which is a threshold for potential historic significance, typically for the California Register and for CEQA. We took a picture of each of those and we created a table with some basic property information. We also put together a historic context for the Mayfield area and this Ventura neighborhood area of Palo Alto to understand the development patterns and the people who lived there over time. And so though we didn't do individual property research for all of these properties, we did have a sense of their potential historic context and architecture based on the site visit that we did. Through that process, we found that none of the residences and commercial buildings in the area, aside from 340 Portage, appeared to be eligible for listing in the California Register. Most of the houses, particularly on Olive Avenue, were built in 1946 after the war, so it appears that there was a lot of post-war housing construction which was happening throughout Palo Alto and the Bay Area at the time, and that a lot of this neighborhood was really built out in the mid to late 40s, though there were a smattering of earlier buildings before that time. We had received a question quite a while ago that we responded to in an earlier draft of a report before we finalized it, asking whether these houses were associated with the canning company. And we didn't uncover any historical information that associated the construction of the houses with the canning company. Many of them, as I just mentioned, were built in 1946, which was towards the end of the canning company's period, which ended in 1949. So if the residences were associated, they likely were not historically significant for that association. And while the Ventura neighborhood had more African American and Latino residents than other areas of Palo Alto in the mid-20th century, which was another topic that we dove into a little bit, preliminary research did not find that the area's history of accommodating underrepresented communities rises to a level of significance to warrant historic designation in the California Register. And just to note, this aerial photo in the slide is from 1941, so you can see, you can kind of see the boundary of the plan area, and that a large amount of the area was not yet developed until after 1941. All right, actually I'm going to go back to our first slide just for a moment. The large building that's shaded orange in this picture is 340 Portage, and then there's a smaller building just to the right and bottom that's shaded blue by Ash Street, and that is the office building that I'm going to discuss. So this is 340 Portage, former cannery building that was built in stages between 1918 and the 1940s. And this is the office building, which it was moved to its current location in 1940, and we believe that it may have been previously used as a dormitory for the cannery and was built between, if that's the case, it was built between 1918 and 1925, 1918 being the date that the cannery was originally constructed, and 1925 is when this dormitory building shows up in the first Sanborn Fire Insurance map. So I'm going to just describe our statement of significance for this property. Agricultural industries, including fruit and vegetable canning, were once the dominant industries in Santa Clara County. The oldest portions of the cannery building were constructed in 1918 for the Bayside Canning Company, which was owned by Chinese immigrant and prominent canning businessman Thomas Foon Chu. Under Chu, the Bayside Canning Company rose to become the third largest fruit and vegetable cannery in the world in the 1920s, behind only Libby and Del Monte. After Chu's death, the cannery was subsequently purchased and operated for more than 20 years by the Sutter Packing Company, another fruit and vegetable cannery. The Sutter Packing Company significantly expanded the cannery building and its operations throughout the 1930s and 40s as it prepared for and raced to meet the demands of World War II. For a time, the cannery was the largest employer in the Mid-Peninsula, and when it closed in 1949, it was the largest employer in Palo Alto. My understanding is that Safeway had bought the Sutter Packing Company in 1946, and though the company was still very profitable, it didn't fit within their company profit scheme, so they closed it. The trajectory of canning operations at the plant, which began in the early 20th century, peaked in the 1920s, increased production to meet the demands of World War II, and then quickly declined as residential development and new industries began to replace agricultural industries in the post-war period. This corresponds closely to the broad pattern of the history of the canning industry in Santa Clara County. The building is a rare surviving example of Palo Alto's and Santa Clara County's agricultural past. So we identified this property to be significant under Criterion 1 for events, with a period of significance identified as 1918 to 1949, the full period in which it operated as a cannery. Just to comment on the other couple of potential criteria for the California Register, one is Criterion 2, which is association with significant people. For a property to be found eligible for the California Register under Criterion 2, it must be associated with a person who has contributed significantly to local, state, and national history, and the property must be the best representation of the reason for which the person is significant. The building at 340 Portage Avenue was originally built by Thomas Foon Chu in 1918 as a second canning plant for his Bayside Canning Company and continued under his ownership until his death in 1931. Although Chu's father had founded the cannery in El Viso, an earlier cannery as well in San Francisco, Thomas Foon Chu is regarded as the primary driving force behind the Bayside Canning Company's growth into the third largest fruit and vegetable cannery in the world by 1920. In spite of its association with 340 Portage Avenue, the building was not the first canning plant constructed by Chu, which is part of the National Register-listed El Viso Historic District. In addition, and this is the most important for this criterion, the building was extensively expanded after Chu's death, primarily when it was owned and operated by the Sutter Packing Company. The building, therefore, does not retain enough integrity to Chu's period of association to be eligible under Criterion 2 for a direct association with him, though his contribution to the industry and this property is reflected during the early period of the Criterion 1 period of significance, which I've already discussed. So it includes both the Bayside Cannery and the Sutter Packing Company period. I'm happy to answer any questions if that's a little confusing. But I would just say that to be eligible for the California Register, you need both significance and integrity. And so essentially what I'm saying is that there wasn't enough integrity only to Thomas Foon Chu's period to be found eligible under that criterion, because there were so many changes made after that. Yes?
Thank you.
I have a little bit more in my presentation.
Okay, I'll ask the
if you
question
want.
after you finish, Christine.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Christine.
Just to mention Criterion 3, which is significant architecture. We did not find that the property was significant under Criterion 3. 340 Portage Avenue consists of what were originally several connected cannery facilities and associated warehouse buildings. It's primarily constructed of reinforced concrete with utilitarian wood post and beam construction and no ornamentation, consistent with its functional design. The former office building at 3201 to 3225 Ash Street is a plain wood frame building built in a vernacular style. Neither of the buildings appear to exhibit artistic value, nor are they particularly distinctive examples of cannery building or industrial warehouse typology such that they would rise to a level of individual significance for the California Register. So for the purposes of CEQA, we found that 340 Portage was a qualified historic resource. And I will also mention, because it's come up in a couple of public comments about the National Register, that the State Office of Historic Preservation generally provides guidance that the California Register and National Register have an equal footing, essentially the same criteria, and the Office of Historic Preservation doesn't see any difference between levels of significance. So though we did not specifically evaluate this property in our report for eligibility for the National Register, it's assumed that it would also be eligible for the National Register. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Martin Bernstein, you said something about, if you look on packet page 15, please. And for the members of the public, that's the entire 340 Portage building. You said something about, one of your last sentences, you said, is the entire structure on the orange on packet page 15, that is eligible, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Both the orange and the blue buildings
Okay.
together are what we have identified as significant on this site.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other board comments at this time? Maybe we'll open it up to the public and hear what our audience has to say about this. I have four cards. First card is Laura. Please come up to the podium and state your name, and try to keep the microphone close to your mouth because it works better in recording.
and I promise no singing. My name's Laura Bajuk. I'm Executive Director of the Palo Alto Museum, and I'm a resident of Palo Alto since I fell in love with one of your native sons 20 years ago. Love this community. I love exploring its history. What the statement I wanted to make was that, first of all, the museum stands by to assist the city and the community in the interpretation of the history of, well, the history of the community in general. So as you address these issues, if there are things relating to history, interpretation, we can help with that, and we stand by to assist. We feel that's part of our job. I think one of our goals is to answer the questions behind the communities. Why does it look the way it does? Why is the railroad here? I think understanding the past layout of the community really answers those questions. One of the things that ties into the cannery community for me is the economic impact of the railroad. The fact that Southern Pacific comes to this area, has to figure out how to get people to live here, and they decide that orchards are going to be the most profitable opportunity. Profitable for small families who can support their family, support themselves on a relatively small piece of land, grow the fruit, trek it down to the railroad, which is where the canneries are located, and this was one of the biggest. Valley fruit fed the world. Before tech, I'd say 180 years ago, or in the 1920s, we would have talked about orchards and fruit the way we talk about tech today. Makes me wonder what it's 100 years from now, how we'll be talking about our tech era that we're in the middle of as I look at my screen where I have my notes. We were just as big to the rest of the world at that time with fruit. So there's a tendency to be sentimental and think, oh, it was so lovely when we had all those trees, but it was big business, and it was a sticky business cutting cods. It employed teenagers, minorities, women had jobs. People could afford to support their families by working in the canneries. And it was immensely profitable for the railroad because it was one of the most expensive things you could ship. Gravel could sit by the side of the railroad and wouldn't be harmed, but fruit had to go quickly. And our fruit went all around the world thanks to Southern Pacific and their global network, which predates those we have today. But the bottom of the market was reached after World War II. During World War II, you could sell all your fruit. 80% of the fruit in this area, I believe, went to the military efforts to feed the troops. So when the war ended, that was really the end of this market. And at that same time, we have people here who don't want to leave California, and for good reason. My family was one of them. We wanted to stay. We needed housing, so there's a huge boom. Tech is building up, again, influenced by World War II. People have jobs. This is where the jobs are. So where we are today is directly connected to what happened really not so long ago. And again, we stand by to help in any way you'd like to interpret it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Next card I have is Karen Holman. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for bringing this to the HRB. And thank you for answering some of the questions I had submitted. Appreciate that very much. I think it's really important. There are several things that are important here. One of the things I think is important that, yes, clarifying that California National Register, it's presumed that if you're California, you're also eligible for the National Register. I think in many people's minds, it makes a difference, though, because National Register carries a lot more a plume, if you will, in people's minds. So if sometimes we're talking about this, California, and by reference, National Register, something like that, it also, in the staff presentation, I think it's going to lead to some confusion if it's stated as one property's been identified as historic, when actually it is the cannery building and the associated office, and I can understand that might be one property, considered as one property. However, it's two different addresses, and I think that can lead to confusion if it's only referred to as one historic building or property. I think there are many, many opportunities at this site. I've been following Ventura very closely because I care a great deal about it, as many people in the neighborhood do, and some people are out of town because of vacations and such that are committed to this project. And I think a lot of the goals of the work of the plan can be accomplished in more creative ways than maybe are being considered to this point in time. I did mention in my email yesterday this plan map. It's a working tool that was handed out to the working group, and I do want you all to see it. I don't think you've been provided this. And what's important about this is that this was provided by staff, not the major property owner. It shows as areas, parcels that may be redeveloped within the plan horizon. It shows the office building under that color overlay, and it shows all of the cannery building except for 2 sections that are being proposed for retention as being redeveloped. And I think that's really important for you all to know, and I don't know where this came from or where the basis could be in or the Secretary's standards. Those proposals, especially around the cannery building, one is to provide a street, which is right directly in front of the existing cannery building, and 2 pedestrian bicycle paths that run through where the building is now. People who are walking and biking can make turns. We're fastened, and I'm going to hand this through staff. I'll hand this to you all. And I'd like to get that back if I could. And then the other thing is culturally. Thomas Foon Chu, and I'm glad Gloria Hom is here today. Thomas Foon Chu accomplished not only what he did by this cannery being the largest behind Del Monte and Hines. Thank you to Page and Turnbull for discovering that. But this was one of the largest employers on the Mid-Peninsula under his ownership. Consider that this was in a time when this was not the most welcoming of environments. And he had, and the photos clarify this, he hired multicultural employees. And he accomplished that with an open, I'm kind of a little bit interpreting here, but not a lot. The photos demonstrate that he had multicultural employees. And I think, that kind of acceptance, that kind of model, we could, especially at this time and place, could really appreciate and benefit from that kind of model. And when it comes to the industrial buildings, and then I'll wrap up with this, when it comes to the industrial buildings, adaptive reuse has not been considered for any of these buildings as far as I can tell, and I have gone to every one of the working group meetings and stayed to all of the meetings except for one when I had to leave early. Consider things like in Sebastopol, the Barlow. The Barlow is a retail and commercial area that is industrial buildings that were there and some infill buildings that were developed in keeping with that style, and it's hopping busy. It was flooded this last year in the rains, and I was there just recently again. Almost everyone has come back, and new businesses have taken place there too. So I think no working group and no plan are you going to be able to accomplish everything, but I think much can be accomplished while retaining these buildings, and I think it's critical that we respect our cultural diversity and the history that's represented on this site, especially given its rarity, because most of the Valley of the Heart's Delight relics are disappeared. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next person is Terry Holzmer.
Good morning. I am a member of the NEVCAP, or what you want to call the North Ventura Working Group. However, I'm not representing them here today. I'm representing myself, okay? I would like to take a moment, first of all, to support my view that the Fry's Bayside Canneries site is not only historically significant to Palo Alto's own history, but significant to the state's, and even of national significance. As you may have read in the Page and Turnbull Historical Resource Evaluation Report, the site does meet criterion 1, but does not apparently does not meet criteria 2 and 3. I personally have done research on this site and have done significant research on the past history, and have interviewed and talked to not only Mrs. Hom, but to other people who were involved. I disagree with the criterion, the Page and Turnbull of criterion 2 and 3 as well, which was not even really mentioned. I believe criterion 2, the significance of Thomas Foon Chu cannot be overestimated at all. I think this gentleman, he created something out of literally nothing. In many ways, I believe that he could be called in Chinese American history, the first great American entrepreneur in America. I think that he came to this country with really nothing, and he created a business that became, like you said, like other people have said, the third largest cannery in the world. And the significance of that is kind of lost over history. We don't realize that before there was high tech in this area, there was a growing business, the cannery and fruit business, which really dominated this area, and also was significant for the entire world, not only this country. I think Thomas Foon Chu and his ability to not only cross barriers, as other people have mentioned, but also to find solutions to problems. He was one of the unique creators and inventors of the cannery industry. He created a machine, for example, that automatically washed cannery wood boxes. This was something they had to do every time they had new fruit. They had to wash the boxes, but he created a device that would do it automatically. Probably the first invention of such a thing in the history of this area, and maybe of the world, actually. I think there's other significance of him as well. I think the idea that he created a business that really made significance throughout the world. I would like to encourage you, if you have not seen this, and I don't know if it's in your report or not, there is a story called The Story of Our Local Bayside Cannery that was published in 2010, and I would be glad to share that with you as well and show you that. Finally, I'd just like to mention really quickly, if you've not seen this exhibit, it's a great exhibit to go see. It's currently at the Los Altos History Museum, which I think you probably all have been there. But right now it's called Silicon Valley Eats. And it tells a little bit about a history of how this area became known as the Heart's Delight, the Valley of Heart's Delight. But in that exhibit, there's a great exhibit on Thomas Foon Chu. And I encourage you, if you have not seen it, to definitely go and observe and visit it as well. Again, I'm also available if you'd like to talk to me, since my research might be helpful to you as well. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. If you could, if you're willing to share the article that 2010 article you were referring to, if you could give it to staff.
I think staff already has it, they do.
Okay, great. Thank you for your comments. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here, and Kirsten Flynn.
Okay. Hello, I'm Kirsten Flynn. I'm a lifelong resident of Palo Alto and a member of the North Ventura Community Area Plan team. And want to say something to this subject. When I'm working with a group, and I work with the NVCAP because I have lived here so long and I'm so ingrained in the community, and even though it kind of stresses me out to work in a political setting, but what I try to do is I try to focus on the overall goals and shared values of what the group is trying to accomplish. And I think that we can all agree that the goals of this potential redevelopment effort is to create affordable housing, because you cannot open a newspaper without realizing that California is in an affordable housing crisis. And I have 3 young adult children who I would dearly love to live close to me, which they cannot presently do. We enjoy the benefits of and enjoy being around the vibrant small office space environment where many startups originate here in Palo Alto. And that's part of something I think we do not want to necessarily quash. However, we have been hurt by it because of the jobs housing imbalance. And we all want a high quality place to live and work. So those are the overarching goals, sort of, and stay focused on those and we'll come out okay. And as far as that last point, I think that this building really has a huge effect on quality of life. it really resonates for me as a Palo Alton because I've seen that California is obsessed with the new. We are obsessed with the new. We don't have a lot of history because we're a young state compared to Europe or the East Coast. Perhaps we don't have the most significant architectural resources, but what we have is what we have. That's what's left is what is left, what has not already been erased. And a plaque does not bring history to life. I'm not sure if you've noticed that the way a building does. And so what I'd like to say is I believe I'm a designer in my private life, and I believe design thinking, good design thinking, can solve a lot of problems if we say with an open mind and a creative confrontation to achieving these goals. I believe we can achieve all of these goals and also preserve this building. And I would hope that we make the best, most creative effort we can to do so. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And finally, I think we're honored to have Thomas Funchu's granddaughter, Gloria Ham, here to speak. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Elena, for inviting me to the meeting. And I am Thomas Funchu's granddaughter, and I also am a 50-plus years resident of Palo Alto. And I'm here to just say that I'd like to maintain and retain the historical value of and highlight Bayside Cannery. In the 1920s, when it was in its heyday, it was the only large business in Palo Alto. I mean, Palo Alto was the university, but in terms of a large business, Bayside Cannery was actually it. And I think it's really an important historical contribution to the area, and certainly I'd like to see it highlighted in some fashion and certainly maintained. It canned primarily peaches, apricots, pears, and the Alviso cannery canned primarily tomatoes, but this area was mainly the fruits and fruit salads. And it used the train system to transport the cans to other areas of the world. So thank you very much for your time, and if you wanted any more information on the cannery, I'll be very happy to submit it to you.
Great, thank you. And I particularly appreciate the fact that you've come today to talk to us. So I don't have any other cards. Maybe we'll move on to a board discussion of the staff report.
If I may, I can respond to some of the questions that were raised during the public comments.
Certainly, go ahead.
First of all, what I wanted to bring your attention to is that the project goals are up here. I can send the link separately and post it up, but so they do list what the goals are around housing and land use, transit, pedestrian, and bicycle connections, connected street grid, community facilities and infrastructure, balance of community interests, urban design and guidelines, sustainability, and the environment. And just quickly back to the top, there it goes. So we have a section about the project engagement, which is where you'll find links to all of the reports and materials, resources, and contact information. And this is where we list all upcoming meetings. And the article that Mr. Holzheimer referenced is also included under the engagement section under the April 17th working group meeting, and I can provide a link afterwards. And then there were a few other items that I wanted to mention. And there was a plan that was shared today that was shown at one of our working group meetings in the past. So just to clarify, yes, exactly that one. That is also available on our website. But I wanted to clarify that the purpose of that plan was to start a conversation about what the potential options are. It's not a proposed option. We have not developed one, but the purpose is to show what the potential pattern could be. We will be, again, going back to the working group with more on that, but, it's still early in the process. We're just about finishing the data gathering stage right now, but the plan options are going to depend on a number of factors, including the historic discussion. So that discussion we're having now, so we need to have that done before we can actually develop options. The other item is also looking at the creek. One of the things that City Council mentioned was they wanted to look at naturalizing the creek, and that's also an item that has to be done and analyzed in order for us to actually come up with options for discussion. So that is a good information to have in the plans, that plan set, but it's just one piece of the background. And again, as I've mentioned, that adaptive reuse hasn't been discussed because we actually haven't come to discussion, but certainly that's something we will be considering, and when we come back with more on the options. And that concludes my staff report. Thanks.
Great, thank you for pulling that page of goals up. I was sorry that we didn't see on that list of goals historic preservation as part of it, considering that the cannery building is such an integral part of this redevelopment process. I wanted to ask a couple of questions of Christina, if I could. I was interested in the evaluation of the railroad siding. If you could pull up the aerial view of the site so we could look at it. I'm wondering what, when you evaluate the significance of a siding, what's the cutoff level of significance? In the aerial view, you can clearly see where it was, and it hasn't had railroad tracks there for years, but the High Line Park in New York City, which is a former elevated railway, has some rails in some portions and doesn't, and yet it's one of the most successful sort of rehabilitated uses to create a park in New York City. So could you comment on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, we didn't find the rail spur specifically to be historically significant, but it contributes to the history of the site overall and the building as part of its cannery function. As Elena mentioned, and it's in our report, the tracks themselves were removed by Southern Pacific in 1964. So what remains is kind of a pattern that's reflected in the parking area currently. So we mentioned that pattern as a character-defining feature of the site, along with just a few landscape site features that contribute to the significance of the cannery property, but we didn't call out the track specifically. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just concerned that just because we don't have track there, that particular space loses significance and then becomes, it just basically disappears. By the way, that spur, I think, that's the spur that continued all the way down to Los Gatos, and that the current Foothill Expressway space, at least near Gunn High School, used that abandoned spur. The county used that spur to develop Foothill Expressway. So it was, I remember as a child watching the trains come to Rastradero Road at where Gunn High School is now located every day in the afternoon, dropping off commuters to San Francisco. Okay, another question. You had mentioned that the cannery buildings didn't, I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but maybe you could talk about how the architecture of the cannery building was not significant? Or am I remembering that correctly?
That's correct. We found that the buildings were in their nature quite utilitarian and functional, and that there wasn't anything that was specifically unique compared to other types of industrial buildings to rise to an individual level of significance for the California Register under that criterion.
So I guess I'm puzzled by that conclusion, because it seems to me that what that suggests is that the only way a a building, in this case a cannery building, could be considered significant if it was unique or almost one of a kind. And the fact that this building has the characteristics of multiple canning buildings, I mean, even ones down in Sunnyvale look similar to this one, or they are similar. I'm just not sure why that wouldn't rise to a level of significance that would add to support for a greater level of importance.
The building, the physical building, is important in that it represents the reason for significance, which we've identified as the cannery operation under criterion 1. So that's not to discount that the physical building is not important. It must physically represent its reason for significance and its period of significance, which we identified as 1918 to 1949. But we just didn't find it to be individually significant for its architecture itself, its design. It was an agglomeration of a series of additions over time that were really made for the purpose of the cannery function and its development and growth, which reflects the criterion related to events and use that we identified more than like an architectural style or period, typology, things of that nature that usually fall under the criterion 3 discussion.
Okay, so I'm thinking about Pier 70 in San Francisco, which is the oldest West Coast shipping facility. It still operates today as a repair place. It is a huge conglomeration of buildings that occurred and were built over a long period of time in the early 1900s. It's being repurposed. All the old buildings that are still standing, I think, are going to be repurposed, and then there's going to be infill. So again, I'm thinking in the case of this entire building at 340 Portage, it is an initial cannery building that is added onto over a period of years, and each of those building additions become significant because the latest one is only 79 years old, and the earliest one, 1918, now is 101 years old. So again, I would think that this would be significant. The entire building is significant, and one of the things that troubled me most about this initial proposal to get the conversation started is that it was going to cut the building up and create certain sort of preserved parts and then basically destroy the rest. And I'm just wondering if you can. Well, that's okay. I think we've had enough conversation about this because I think it's going to come back. I want to give my colleagues an opportunity to weigh in. I wonder if staff could talk about the Matadero Creek changes and how that might affect, the historic buildings that we're considering.
I'm sure. So right now we are in process of trying to select a consultant for the analysis of the creek. So the consultant's analysis will let us know what is actually feasible to be improved. Some of the items that were discussed would be fully naturalizing the creek, because right now it's completely channelized in that portion of it. However, it gets complicated because of the right-of-way issues and its, an impact on drainage further down the creek watershed. We've started conversations with Santa Clara Valley Water District, but we'll have to involve multiple other jurisdictions in terms of what's feasible. So once we understand the feasibility of what we can do, then it can range from partial naturalization, no naturalization, where we would leave the creek alone, but we would improve on either side, so providing more of a connectivity through the site, especially as it leads down south to the park. Or it could be partial naturalization, or it can be fully improving and naturalizing the site. So as we look over as we develop the plans for the site, it could be a range of things. It could be just by itself, or we could try to help create some sort of connection to whatever we propose for the other buildings within the plant site.
So if I understand correctly, the idea of naturalizing the creek channel would only occur within the boundaries of this particular study area?
At this point, because that's what we're limited to the 60-acre site of this project. So the creek runs through only the southern portion of the site.
Okay. Colleagues, comments, questions? Go ahead, Martin.
Thank you, Chair Bauer. I was very interested in Laura Bayuk's comments today about what was significant when this building was first put into business. And that being the connection between how famous this business was and our current Silicon Valley businesses. You know, the company Sprint, that stands for Southern Pacific Railroad Interconnection. So, very interesting connection, as Laura Bayuk was saying. What was considered old then is now we're using the same words, Southern Pacific Railroad Internet Sprint. Also, let's see, when I was probably about 13 years old, I was a farm worker. And I picked green beans. It is now the property called Oakmead Industrial Park. So certainly a lot of one industry down from farming to high tech. So it certainly is part of the regional history. Did I hear Chair Bauer say something about historic preservation was not a goal for this area?
It's
Actually,
not. Sorry.
what I said was I was unhappy not to see historic preservation as part of the listed goals in that, but it might have been there because it flew by.
So just a clarification, it was historic preservation a listed goal? So,
It's not listed by itself, but it is, it is part of the neighborhood fabric, and it also goes to sustainability. So it has been identified as something important by council, but it isn't listed separately as a goal.
Okay. For future meetings with the working group, would staff consider including that as a goal?
We can certainly bring that up. We are going back to council in August, and the council does have the ability, the prerogative to make changes to the goals and objectives.
Thanks. Sorry, I'll clear my throat. I'm going back to the railroad spur. There are a lot of communities on the peninsula that still have actually the tracks themselves. For example, in San Carlos, there are a lot of metal fabrication companies all through that area, Quarry Road, for example, where the railroad tracks are still in the parking lots, and they're really fantastic. In Danville, I think there's called the Iron Horse Trail, I believe, and that used to be a railroad. The tracks had been removed, but now it became actually a parkway. So there's still the right-of-way is gone, but the use is still there. So there'd be opportunities to have that railroad spur somehow recognized physically. I think that'd be a nice character-defining element to retain. The map that Ms. Holman presented to us, it did show, it looks like two cut-throughs on the 340 Portage Street, but I assume that's not the plan to do that, correct?
It's just brought up as a discussion point. So it hasn't been actually proposed or selected,
Yeah.
but it's just one of the items that we wanted the working group to consider because connectivity was one of the goals that City Council raised.
Right, yeah. So that may be balanced, obviously, with removal of historic fabric, of course. Good.
Yes,
If
correct.
this, once, hopefully, historic preservation becomes a stated goal.
Right. Well, so basically, the goals and objectives really span a range of items. There's no way that we can, as mentioned before, there's no way that we can meet all of the goals, but it's going to be a balance of meeting some of the goals and then making other goals more important. So it'll be an interesting discussion.
Sure, yeah. I'm looking at the photos on packet page 29. I don't know if members of the public can see, it's a very small drawing. I'll let the staff get to packet page 29. And looking at the upper right-hand photograph of all the steel trusses there, I'm reminded when the project of the creamery on 800 block of High Street came to Palo City Historic Resources Board, similar kind of structure. And the board discussed, is there any way to get adaptive reuse of the structure so that magnificent architectural features can be retained? It was determined by enough of the different working groups and committees that the structure could not be saved physically because of deterioration. So that was sadly torn down, but so here's an opportunity where the building is not deteriorating to the point where it is demolition by neglect. So that would support, I think, the idea that perhaps the structure itself is historically significant, combined with the other significant aspects of integrity. Okay. Let's see. That's my comments for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Margaret?
Yes, thank you for all this great information because I always thought of obviously Fry's being a consumer in this area, going to Fry's to shop. That was my sort of the extent of my experience there. So having a little bit more insight into the history of the site has been really educational for me. I'm just thinking about for me, I just think that there's three options for the redevelopment of the site, either to completely see it as a historic resource and preserve it, or to completely neglect the historic significance of the site or the buildings, and just develop it as any developer would probably go forth and do, or find a common ground somewhere in between. I think to preserve this and readapt it into something that is a community resource is a great idea, and I know that a lot of people have said this could be a great artist colony. It could have open studios. I was reading some of the public comments. But I think just given the fact that we've already established that the building itself doesn't have a historic quality, that I think to be able to remodel it in a way that it would be of use to the public, with public safety, fire issues. Obviously, there's ADA issues because a lot of those buildings are highly elevated because there were loading docks. I think that for a building to go through that process, it's basically going to be so drastically redesigned that I think that a lot of the original aspects of the building would just simply be lost. So I think that Chair Bauer and Martin's comments about let's inject the fact that we want to preserve this site in some way, I think that should be part of the criteria for the redevelopment. I don't really see that we can preserve these buildings as they are now and make them useful, but we don't want to see everything lost and everyone just ignore the fact that the site does exist. I think we need to find a common ground, and I think that there's a creative way to do that, either by keeping the footprint of the building, keeping some of the architectural features that are existing in the building, maybe the interior trusses, or maybe this, I don't know what we call this roof line, the monitor roofs. I think that's what a neat, that's sort of an iconic, you had some really great photos of it, like this photo. Maybe just we take images of the existing site and have them have that as a design element, part of the design criteria, and incorporate some of these historic elements. Maybe they're not the original historic elements, but maybe we can creatively adapt so we don't lose this. I mean, it is a resource because of the events that happened there. So I think we should make a huge effort to retain it in some way, to honor it, pay homage to it. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you, Margaret. Roger, comment?
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble here, but in my old days, younger days, I worked for a company that used to blow stuff up into the air and try to figure out where the wind was blowing and this kind of thing. And we were one block over, just right next to there. I think it's Olive. I'm not sure if that's the corner. I'm just disclosing that as that's my notice there. And I just want to declare that I know that property. But I don't know if I have. My question is, where do we go from here? What happens from our discussion today? Does this go before the council, or how far a process? Where are we in the process?
So basically, we are going back to council. As part of the background, we'll let them know that we've taken the HRE to the Historic Resources Board. But what we're going to do is we're going to present a summary of what was discussed here to our working group. Staff will also take this information as we prepare for the meeting. So the working group will have your input as they consider the plan alternatives that they're going to be developing with staff.
Okay.
I guess.
Great. I wanted to, before we leave this topic, since we don't have any board motions, to share with all the people here this book that Amy French shared with me, and it's titled Historic Bay Area Visionaries, and it describes, in the book, it actually has an entire chapter about the cannery and 6 other people who are significant to the local history of Palo Alto and the peninsula. It was fascinating reading. Juana Barones is in here, and several other people, including Charlie Chaplin. Anyway, it has a very good chapter about this building.
Good, thanks. I just wanted to kind of go back to that earlier topic. So basically, in terms of process, the process would be we would take all this input, we would present it to the working group. Working group will work together with staff to come up with the options, the different alternatives. We'll take that to the community at a community meeting sometime early next year. Then all of that goes to the city council for their review. City council will come up with a preferred alternative. That preferred alternative would then become the basis of the plan itself. And once the preferred alternative is chosen, then that will help us start the work on the EIR for the project. So at that point when we actually have project alternatives that will work with our environmental consultants as well as Page and Turnbull to evaluate the impact, the historic impact of the proposed project. And then that will then go through the process and up to council for final adoption.
Great, thank you. I think that the board, I hope all of the members that are not here today can participate in the EIR review, which will come when this project moves forward. I think our comments today would suggest that we feel that this project needs to take into consideration the historic character of the cannery building and the office. And how that is expressed in the project development would be, of course, subject to all of the working group input, lots of other input, but our input, I think, is that somehow these buildings need to be preserved and incorporated into a new project. I think that my colleagues here today share that. So, Martin?
Yes, thank you, Chair Barr. I have a question for staff. Is this considered in terms of historic preservation ordinances, is this considered a Group A or a Group B? And so Group A requires it to be located in some historical category, which right now it's not historic category, correct? So it's not a Group A, right?
Yeah, so that's a handy document that needs updating, that is very helpful for the single-family residential projects that we see coming through. In this case, this is a non-residential project that is subject to architectural review, so there's going to be a discretionary project on this site, which then kicks it into the CEQA review. This document you're holding, the bulletin, is really helpful for staff to understand, single-family residential, which often is not subject to discretionary reviews.
Oh, okay.
So that helps, yeah.
So the Group A and Group B only refers to residential properties, not, is that correct?
Well, that's the focus of that bulletin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, so it's been identified now as a eligible resource. So we consider it a CEQA resource for the purpose of review.
All right. Okay, just following up my thoughts though about this. So it says under Group B historic resource, it's listed in the national, so right now it's not listed, correct? Okay. And
Correct,
then,
and only the property owner can petition the state to have their property listed, actually. So the eligibility is the thing that kicks it into CEQA review. But the listing itself is up to the property owner.
Okay, all right, so, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I did not know that this only refers to, am I correct, this only refers to residential properties, Group A and Group B.
I think we should schedule a separate meeting for this bulletin, if you don't mind, so have further discussion. I'm not prepared to discuss that.
I see, okay, good. And I do see that on today's agenda that this is actually not listed as a study session. This is action item, according to this agenda, right? This is action item meeting, not a study session.
Well, I mean, to the extent that your comments will be considered in the next steps in this process, I think it's an action item. There's no project under CEQA currently to make a recommendation to council on, for instance. But I guess it's kind of a study session, but, because there's, I don't think we need a vote, straw poll or anything.
Yeah, no, I don't think we need a formal vote, but we'll definitely be forwarding on your comments and recommendations to the working group.
So it's an action item that doesn't require any action.
Yeah.
Can the staff can the staff assure the board that again it is because of potential eligibility, correct? It's not.
It's no longer potentially eligible. It is eligible.
Oh, okay, great.
Because this study has been done. Once a study has been done to find it eligible,
Right.
I mean, I would, from your comments, surmise that you are concurring that it's eligible. And as you've read through the report, this is one of your functions, is to review an important document such as this and weigh in, I guess, if you'd like.
Okay, so we're guaranteed that this is tied into CEQA then? Okay.
Correct.
And that ties into the Secretary of Interior standards for any alterations to a historic resource, correct?
Well, I think, again, that's kind of more lower level projects. Yes, but because an environmental impact report would be prepared that would weigh the retention versus demolition, let's say, of the existing buildings on the site, that go up to council. The council makes a decision. If the council decision is to retain the buildings, then, then modifications there too would be, mitigated or what have you. There'd be
Okay, well, thanks for
options.
clarifying that. When I saw the words potentially eligible, I thought, okay, maybe, so that doesn't mean it's eligible, but you're saying it is eligible, therefore CEQA is guaranteed to have to respond to CEQA requirements. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So just 1 second, Margaret. Just so it's clear, I think I'd like to take a poll of board members and just to verify that we do feel that this is eligible, it meets the criteria for listing, so that there's no ambiguity about that in the record. Anybody disagree with that, that this is an eligible building? The criteria qualifies it?
I agree that it is, yeah.
Margaret?
Yeah, just quick question. So if Page and Turnbull has reviewed all the findings and they've clearly stated that the building itself is not, I mean, I think the site and the event of the site makes it eligible. But if we have a professional that has done this report, how does that weigh in?
It was not found to be significant for its architecture or design, but that doesn't mean that the building is not significant. The building itself represents the significance associated with the use and events of the cannery function, and so we did still call out character-defining features of the building as well as the site. So there's still a physical representation that when it comes down to it, there isn't really a difference when you're evaluating a project, which criterion was found to be the significant one.
Thank you, that makes it more clear. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, okay, Roger, you concur?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, so all of us concur that this building is significant and could be listed so that that's clearly transmitted to the council. Okay.
I had one quick question. Is this project going to circle back to us as the plans develop, or is this the last time we'll review this project?
No, this will come back. So once we've developed plan alternatives, and we'll be doing the CEQA analysis, so that'll come back to you for your recommendation.
All right.
Ideally, we would come back during the public comment period, like we're doing with the Castellea project, for instance. So you would have a public meeting during the comment period, if we can swing that, to have a coordinated discussion.
Chair Bauer, I see since the public hearing is still open, I see a member of the public who would like to make a comment, please.
Oh, please.
Could I address the board for just a few minutes? I'll be short. Thank you.
So as I mentioned earlier, housing was a pressing concern at the end of the war. It's still a pressing concern. It's amazing how things don't really change too much. But as a suggestion, orchards were replaced by housing at that time period, but we've retained a few throughout the county. Los Altos is still fighting to protect its trees around that civic center and the museum I used to manage. Thank you, Martin, for mentioning it. Go to that exhibit. So a few have been kept as living monuments. I think there's an opportunity here to keep a portion of the real facility. I'm going to back up for a minute and say I was very disappointed when we went to Europe to learn that castles didn't look like what Disney had taught me they looked like. And so there's a sentimentalization that can happen, or a sort of faux-ness that can come with trying to emulate our past. But we can't preserve all of it. We need this space to be used for the betterment of the community. But perhaps a corner, maybe the corner that talks the most about Thomas Foon Chu and his contributions to our community. You know, the cannery was expanded after his death. It was expanded by later owners. But what's the piece that most attaches to him? And is there some section of that that could speak to that history? And also the railroad history. I'm actually active, because my husband is, with railroad museums. And I know we could do something interesting about the interpretation of the fruit industry. For example, Southern Pacific employed the Stanford swim team, I think in the 40s or so, for publicity shots where they were stoking ice into the top of the reefer units, the refrigerated units that would carry the fruit. They weren't wearing much. It was sort of the beefcake of the day. This was their promotions department thinking this was wise. These are the sorts of stories that are attached here that people aren't familiar with, and bring a smile to our faces, too, when we think how things haven't changed. Industrial buildings aren't sexy. They're not meant to be. They're functional. And even the Eiffel Tower was considered too industrial, too commercial, too boring. It didn't reflect the aesthetic of the day. Perhaps as time passes, that would change with an industrial building like this. But perhaps a small corner can be kept. Again, real places are the ones that teach history, not the recreated ones. So even, no matter how fabulous our museum is, and it's going to be fabulous, it is going to a historic site that gives the greatest impression to people when they're thinking about history, and it is the most trusted source of history. History museums come second. And third on that list from a survey from Indiana is someone who actually was at a historic site or in a historic occurrence like a World War II veteran. So trying to keep a piece of the authentic history, a small corner, would be my hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, I'm not sure I can pronounce your last name. Bayuk? Yeah, anyway, so you are first and our last commenter. Okay. You want to make a comment?
I just wanted to make one quick comment. I forgot to mention that I can remember seeing the train come off and go up, and then you'd go up to Los Altos, the main drag is up there. The train used to run along that area as well. And I guess I'm old enough to remember some of that, so anyway.
Okay, I'd like to point the public or anyone who is going to read the transcript of this meeting to page 8 and 9 in our packets, where the staff has very cogently summarized the significance of this building in terms of criteria. One, which is events, and then second, aspects of integrity. There are 7 of them that defined integrity: location, setting, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And this set of buildings retains 6 of the 7. I think that's one of the strongest statements about any building that's come before this board since I've been on here. And that's rather, I think that's significant, not to overuse the term. So I want to thank all of you who are here. We're going to go into basic board business after this. In particular, thank Gloria Hong for coming to the meeting. It is particularly, to me, meaningful to have somebody who is related to people who we're talking about in a historic sense. Thank you, Christina and Paige and Turnbull and staff for your help in this, and I do think we all look forward to having it come back. And thank everyone who's come. It's the first time we've had a meeting with anybody in the audience in several meetings. So we're going to move on to housekeeping, approval of minutes. Once again, I slogged through the minutes. They're getting better, but any board members that have...
See, I can't vote on it, I was not here. So you don't have...
No, you can abstain, which is what I do.
I'll come back.
So do I have a motion to approve?
I'd like to make a motion to approve
All right,
what we discussed today.
Yeah, Roger, second? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes from June 13th, 2019, say aye. Aye. Roger?
Yeah.
I abstain. I was not participating in that meeting.
Okay, so we have 3, Martin wants to abstain from minutes. Does that mean? Yeah, so we have a quorum. He doesn't have to vote for or against or, yeah, okay, so it's 3 yes and 1 abstention.
I guess I forgot to let people know you could look at, I happened to grab these on my way in. These are things I put together over the years, and so brought them in again.
Right, so Roger is referring to the photographs that he has laid out on the dais behind Amy that have historic pictures of Palo Alto. Subcommittee items,
Actually, David, it says that I was absent during that meeting. I know I came late because I was in traffic, but I did come.
Yeah, no,
Can I change that? Can we change that in the minutes?
Oh, yeah. So
It says that I was absent for the meeting on June 13th,
she came late.
when in fact
Okay, are you speaking about packet page 4?
we're just looking at the minutes on page
minutes.
92. Packet page 92. It says that I was absent for that meeting, but I was actually present.
Okay.
A little tardy.
We'll make that correction. Thank you.
Okay, subcommittee items after this meeting, Roger and I will meet with Amy to discuss the 520, is it 527 Waverly? Is that the right? 526. 526 Waverly.
526 Waverly.
Right. The tile and entry, there are no other subcommittee reports that I'm aware of. So board member questions, comments, announcements? Don't seem to be. I have a question. What's the deadline for our in-service training for this year? Where, we have to go to, we have a certain
I
requirement.
don't know the deadline offhand. I mean, we want to make sure we keep going to trainings.
Well, I think that the report
It's every
ends
February.
October 1st. I mean, we file it in February, but I
Right.
think but it's a look-back period, and I want to
Sure.
be sure. I haven't been able to get to one yet.
Whatever you attend between now and February, or whatever, January, when I
Okay.
bring it to you, I'll
All right.
put on the list.
Okay, we have no other comments or questions. Then we'll adjourn the meeting at 10 o'clock. Thank you all.